Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, ladies and gentlemen. It's me again, Jesse Forrester, your host, in Find the Pioneer talk show series, the series where we identify young and old people making changes in their communities and around the world. Today, we are visited or have our guest as Mr. Jonathon Porritt. He is the founder of Forum for the Future. He's a distinguished fellow and has been a big champion for sustainability throughout his whole life, basically. It is quite a pleasure to be here with him. Jonathon, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
As always, we are here through the Zayed Sustainability Prize, and we'd just like to encourage you to apply to the Zayed Sustainability Prize. Application deadline is now less than a month away, and you know, I've been getting a lot of feedback from you and I love what I'm seeing. So please keep it coming. Definitely apply. It is life-changing and it is going to help people in your community. Be part of that change. Awesome. So with that said.
Jesse, I can probably encourage them in that regard, as I was on the selection committee for the Zayed Future Energy Prize for 10 years, right from its inception. So I know precisely how valuable that prize is and how many people's lives have been changed through it.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it. 10 years and he is a big champion of it. Definitely apply. So, Jonathon, we can begin. And so I just mentioned that you are founder of Forum for the Future. Could you please explain what it is and what it aims to achieve?
Yes, the forum was set up in 1996, and that's an important date because at that time, very few non-governmental organizations worked closely with business. I know it sounds odd these days when you've got a lot of NGOs that do a lot of work with business around the world, both business consortia and individual companies. But in 1996, there wasn't much collaboration going on at all. And so we set the forum up specifically to improve relationships between NGOs, often with very radical thoughts, and with people working in the private sector and the public sector. And now, of course, the nearly 25 years on, I'm happy to say that there is an incredibly deep network of collaborations where the private sector is much more connected in with civil society than ever used to be the case before. So that's why we got the forum going. And for me, it was a very important development in my life personally, because I'd spent most of my life up until that point working with the Green Party here in the UK or with Friends of the Earth and other radical campaigning organizations. So I needed to try to do things a bit differently at that point.
Yeah, that's quite right. I actually can't imagine a scenario where NGOs don't work with the private sector. That's incredible and actually is a testament to how much Forum for the Future has contributed to the world that we live in today. So speaking of, we are currently in the midst of a global pandemic. And at the outset of 2020, much was said about this being the year of action in a decade of change. Such large words. Now with over 1 million people infected with COVID-19 and more than half the human population under some kind of lockdown, this unprecedented pandemic is radically changing the world. Can you elaborate on those changes and whether you think they detract from the progress that was being made, or if they present new opportunities to help build more sustainable economies?
This is a difficult one to call at the moment, Jesse.
True.
At one level, it's pretty disappointing. I mean, most of the momentum that was built up through 2019, and understanding, I think, on the part of many more governments and scientists and businesses that we really had to start moving fast to address the climate emergency. Much of that momentum has been lost, let's be honest. It's very, very difficult to get people to focus on what needs to be done. And I guess the symbolic proof of that was that the big conference of the parties, the climate conference at the end of the year, had to be postponed and pushed back into 2021. So it's difficult to make headway on climate issues at the moment. However, you have to accept that people's perceptions are beginning to change. And there is now a very solid group of organizations, academics, scientists, activists that are saying we need to use this coronavirus crisis to rebuild a very different kind of economy for the future. And people have lots of phrases for this: a good recovery, a just recovery, build back better, lots of different phrases to capture this sense that we've now got an opportunity to come out of the COVID crisis and to use that opportunity then to build the foundations for a radically decarbonized economy of the future. And I'm very encouraged by that. And there's some fantastic work going into that at the moment.
Exactly. And I think that this kind of leads quite easily into our next question about the sustainability trends you think we will see emerge this year and next year. You've already mentioned that the best way, and this has been a theme actually across the talks that we've had, about coming out of COVID-19, thinking differently about the world. And if the bailouts that the governments are proposing need to be centered around the green economy. So based on in light of that fact, actually, what are the trends you see will emerge this year and next year?
I think the first trend that we will see is a recognition that having clean air to breathe in our cities and clean skies, not so full of the CO2 and other greenhouse gases from aviation, I think people have come to accept that it would be better to live without all that constant pollution. So I'm fascinated by the fact that a lot of cities, for instance, are already saying, we're going to use this opportunity to get the cars off our streets, to put in the infrastructure for pedestrians, for cyclists, for scooters, whatever it might be, that we've been talking about for a long time, but now we're going to do it. So Milan, for instance, very important city in Northern Europe, is of course now saying they're going to convert 35 kilometers of their roads for pedestrians and cyclists. So that's the first trend. The second, I think, is going to be around land and land use. I'm very hopeful that people will realize that the constant depletion of the world's forests lies at the heart of the COVID-19 crisis. We know now that the more we encroach on the world's remaining forests, the greater the risk that we face through viruses being released into the human economy, rather than being, as it were, kept in those forests, in those remote environments. I think people get that. I'm hoping that we're going to see a really powerful move now on the part of global institutions to stop deforestation. And then lastly, I really do think this is the age of renewables. It seems to me now that governments have every opportunity to drive this process of change towards decarbonization through renewables, storage, and efficiency. The three great pillars of an alternative energy economy: get the electrons we need and the energy we need from renewables, make sure we use every single bit of it as efficiently as we can in our appliances, our houses, our factories, etc., and develop a lot of new capability for storage, because that's going to be the absolute essence of this revolution.
Exactly. And I think that for me, what's been very interesting, again, as a trend emerging through this talk show series, is how interconnected COVID has shown us our world is, and at the same time showing us how fragmented it is, when it comes down to sustainability. And as you said, those three key pillars are something that we need to think about deeply. And governments, private sector, public sector, all of them need to come together to actually make that sort of change come through. So today's topic is about the circular economy, the key to sustainable development. And I heard you talk about how we could build batteries and use every single atom of energy that we produce from renewable sources. We need to get away from carbon footprint in what we do in our transportation. So what does your vision for a circular economy entail? And how can organizations of all sizes help make this vision a reality?
This is so important, Jesse, and to be honest, it doesn't get enough attention. So to give you a classic example, we are all hoping that the transition out of the internal combustion engine into electric vehicles will be as fast as possible. Yes. Scaled substitution of electric vehicles for petrol and diesel vehicles, basically. Now, that's a real win from the climate point of view, but in order to make those electric vehicles, a huge amount of energy still has to be expended. And to make the batteries for those vehicles, there's a huge amount of very damaging mining that has to go on to extract the minerals, the metals that we need for battery manufacture. So when we talk about scaling up to hundreds of millions of vehicles, electric vehicles, the impact of this is still very considerable. What that demands, of course, is that all batteries should be manufactured so that they can easily be disassembled, and all the raw materials that are used in batteries could then be repurposed and recycled back into new battery production systems. We have to reduce the throughput of minerals and metals, raw materials, into the renewable energy economy. I've just talked about batteries. I could talk about wind power and turbines and all the rest of it. We have to reduce the throughput of raw materials if we're going to get a genuine carbon win of the scale that we now need.
Exactly. And I think you've touched on something. So I personally have been working with, the movement towards electric vehicles, especially here in Africa. And we've been thinking about that deeply, in terms of what it's going to look like for a population that is set to grow exponentially, right? So the youngest people are found in Africa, for example. And so that kind of development needs to be done in a sustainable manner. And I do agree with you that breaking down and figuring out ways to repurpose batteries is super essential. And it's something that we are thinking about in our organization of how that's going to look like for the African market. So it's very interesting to just see synergies pop up at the same time as we are talking. And definitely, as you said, the extraction of lithium, which is one of the most core components of batteries right now, needs to be done also in a way that pollutes the environment less and less. So the circular economy seems to be playing such a huge stage, right? And so you've just talked about a couple of opportunities, a couple of different things people could do. But Jonathon, I want to ask you, what sort of business opportunities, lay it bare for us, does the circular economy have? How can young people like me and others watching take advantage of this?
This is all about design. It's all about using the skills that we have to design the products, the goods that we need, so that we can massively reduce their physical footprint, their negative externality of those products. And I'm really interested in this story, Jesse, because I think we do know how to do this. If you look at the end of life directive affecting vehicle manufacture in Europe, for instance, this has been a pretty good success story. I mean, initially they started out by mandating 85% by weight of a vehicle would have to be recycled, and then they pushed that up to 95%. They haven't quite got there yet, but the regulation that came in forced vehicle manufacturers to change the design of every single car on Europe's roads. Now, for me, this is a very important point. Designers can only design to the standards that are demanded of them by governments. So if you think about electronic goods, for instance, computers, iPads, phones, etc., all those devices, it is ridiculous that governments have not yet mandated a whole set of design principles which would compel the use of materials in those phones to encourage disassembly, reuse, and so on. And frankly, leaving it to the manufacturers themselves, that hasn't served us very well. So when you say, what can young people do? I tell you, the emphasis on design is absolutely critical. It is just so important that we start to design things in a way that we won't get this real negative hit on our environment from the continued use of these very beneficial products.
Yeah. And I think, government being the forefront, I know that the UK specifically has mandated that internal combustion engines should see their death, quote unquote, by 2035. And so we're looking at an interesting time horizon. And from what I'm getting, what you're saying is that could be shortened. And again, as young people looking at these opportunities, design is key because design determines how much we use. And so that actually...
Yeah, it is.
Really
and also then pushing the thinking a bit further. As I just said, look, having electric vehicles is going to be a damn sight better than having the internal combustion engine. But actually what we really need is our cities and all our transport systems to be reconfigured in such a way that we don't actually need electric vehicles either, that we are able, in fact, to rely on transport systems based on car sharing schemes at a much, much bigger scale than we have now, based on urban planning systems that promote public transport, cycling, walking, based on an understanding that young people in the future will never need to own their own vehicle. They won't need to own a car because the quality of the service provided by shared car clubs of one kind or another, public transport and all the rest of it, will mean that the absurdity of owning a car yourself will just disappear completely. And that's the kind of breakthrough we need, but that's also about design. This is social design, not physical or material design, but social design is as important as the whole area of physical design.
Yes. So apart from, say, just public transport and obviously the government intervention and how it's going to look like, now I want to pick your brain about, physical design, right? So demand and calls for sustainable consumer products is growing. What are the key barriers to getting more sustainable products on the shelves, and how can retailers be a part of the solution? So, obviously this links towards more of the everyday goods that we have. How can retailers actually join this movement?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big challenge, Jesse. I'll give you one example that is going on at the moment regarding plastic, okay, because everybody's very focused now on plastics and the damage that plastics are doing to the physical environment, particularly the marine environment. And we know that we've got to reduce the throughput of plastic in every aspect of our consumer-based lives. But plastic is a very useful product for packaging. It does actually make it easier to secure levels of hygiene that other packaging formats will not be able to deliver. This is all about price. For the last 20 years, I've watched, I can't tell you how many brilliant innovators, scientists, developing ways of making polymers, making plastic from waste of one kind or another. And I've watched as companies have brilliantly innovated to use rice hulls, to use citrus peelings, to use the shells from shrimps or prawns, and turn all of these waste products into like-for-like plastic packaging products, films or whatever it might be. But they're always more expensive. And as soon as you get a very low price of oil, which we're going to have for quite some time now, given that demand has collapsed for aviation and other carbon-intensive industries, given a very low price of oil, all of those innovations will die, frankly. And we won't get the circular effect of using all those waste products in society to make what is still a very valuable material if used properly. So this is a difficult thing when you say, what can we consumers do? Frankly, in that area, not very much, because governments have to intervene to ensure that we are able to make circular that which is currently linear. And they can only do that by regulating in those marketplaces to promote the new innovation that we need.
Okay. And it's very interesting because we're flowing with each other. You're just linking again to my next question after my next question. So it's really interesting. So my next question for you was, again, so we've talked about government, we've talked about the necessity of government, the importance that government needs to play. So let's talk a little bit about the policies that governments can expedite to ensure the development of sustainable products and business practices. I know you talked about regulation, but is there more, and could you go deep on that as well?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, and don't get me wrong, Jesse, I'm not belittling the role of consumers or the role of the individual citizen. These are still very important parts of the whole picture. But yes, we have to be completely honest that if you're looking for scaled, transformative change across the global economy, it is only governments that can make that happen at that scale. And that means governments have to use the full kind of toolkit they've got at their disposal to do that. Yes, some of it will be regulation and standards driven, but a lot of it could be fiscal or incentive driven. And I regret the fact that our world leaders have been so slow to acknowledge that in a market-based economy, you have to make the price that we pay for something reflect its true costs, because otherwise that market is not working efficiently. We are externalizing a lot of the costs onto other people, onto the environment, and so on. Governments can do that. Governments could say, we want our markets to work efficiently. They don't have to get rid of the discipline of good market economics. They just have to actually understand what good market economics looks like. And that means stopping the externalities by changing the price factors in those economic relationships. Now, that comes down, after a lot of argument back and forth, it comes down to pricing carbon, essentially. And whatever else we need to see happen over the course of the next 1 year, 2 years, we have to have an understanding that the world needs to move to a common price on carbon, so a global price on carbon, so you don't get leakage in different and so on. And we need to be heading as fast as possible towards a price which would be somewhere around $75 a ton of CO2 equivalent, and moving on from there to $100 a ton and beyond that too. That way, we have a chance of getting a genuinely low carbon form of prosperity across the world.
Yeah, you're right. I think that sort of global perspective is needed. And just recently, I was actually approached about the non-proliferation agreement for fossil fuels, right? Through another young person who was here, Mr. Toby Thorpe. And so it's very interesting that even such elevations can reach government level. And we have, something like, Geneva Convention, targeting more of these things and bringing them to the forefront, right? And so I'm very biased for young people. Obviously, I am a young person, so I would love us to also be there when these decisions are being made, because they do affect, our future, right? So it's super important, I guess, also to have that interconnected and intergenerational sort of dialogue to come up with the best practices for, as you said, good market economics. So my last question for you today is, before we go into the comments from the audience, is what is the net positive approach to doing business? And can you provide examples of organizations that have been successful at embedding this concept into their strategies? So this is net positive approach.
Yeah. So the idea of net positive means that it's not enough just to do less bad. You have to find ways of doing positive good, as it were. So I was talking before about externalities, a favorite concept from the economists. You have to reduce the negative externalities, the damage done to people's lives and the planet. But equally, one has to build positive externalities. So the whole idea of net positive means one has to build social value, for instance, as well as economic value. One has to protect natural capital, and not just protect it, but when you can actually enhance it, build new sources of social capital by recreating ecosystems, protecting forests, and so on. So there are a number of companies that have been taken with this idea of net positive and have worked it into a lot of their programs, corporate responsibility, but more than that, corporate sustainability programs over the last few years. One of the companies that we've done a huge amount of work with in Forum for the Future is Unilever, and just watching how they have tried to incorporate a lot of new thinking about adding value for society, adding value for the environment through protecting biodiversity more carefully, reducing their carbon footprint, looking after their supply chain very differently so that people actually get a better share of the total value created, putting human rights at the heart of what they do, mandating a kind of responsible procurement strategy across the entire company. I guess the one thing you have to say, Jesse, is if we're talking about net positive, you're talking about every single part of a company's impact on society, customers, partners, the environment, the lot. You have to think of it very holistically.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is a challenge to do, because the traditional form of doing business has not been that. And again, I like to bring up, and I know we're a little bit over time, is that when it comes down to the businesses, the social businesses young people are building, it's doing such a great job. And I would also like to just say the Zayed Sustainability Prize is at the forefront of recognizing such initiatives. I mean, the project that I did with my co-founder when I was a student in high school is now becoming a company, and we're building wastewater treatment solutions that are zero waste and have a full circular economic value. And you want to do that for green building societies in Africa and the Middle East, you know, and so we'd never have had that platform if it was not for the Zayed Sustainability Prize. So I think you've definitely hit the nail on the head when it comes down to net positive. And what we need to do is get more positive externalities than, if possible, eliminate the negative. Yeah, that would be the most ideal situation. Indeed. So if you would permit me, Jonathon, I'd just like to read a few comments and then one question that I've seen from the public, and then we can wrap this up.
Sure.
So I'll start with a question. So OK, who has been a very ardent listener, asks, to make circular economic products mainstream, are there challenges with pricing to make them affordable for the common people? So what's the pricing challenge to bridge that gap between the fossil fuel products and these renewable ones?
It's a very good question. And actually, I wish the answer was easier, because sometimes making things in a way that is designed for circularity, designed for waste minimization, designed for complete efficiency, it doesn't always end up in a cheaper product. And if we think of our food economy, for instance, we know sometimes that pursuing the cheapest route to delivering the nutrition, the protein that people need, cheap is not necessarily better. And actually, the kind of balanced diets that we need for the future, it's very difficult to produce and provide those balanced diets if all you're doing all the time is trying to drive down the cost of food. We need to pay the realistic price for the food that we need to produce that kind of outcome for people, better for people in health terms, nutrition terms, and obviously much better for the planet in terms of reduced externality. So this is not an easy one. And I get very worried when people say every sustainability change is automatically going to lead to cheaper goods and services. I don't think that's the case. If we pay the real price, then we'll get better outcomes. If we try to make everything cheaper and cheaper, we won't.
Okay. This is a strong ending from Sir Jonathon. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today on the hashtag Find the Pioneer Talk Show. And I'd just like to recall some sentiments that Jonathon made earlier, that, you know, he's been a committee selection member for the last 10 years. And he says that the Zayed Sustainability Prize is the way to go. So again, thank you, Jonathon.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to everybody listening that you've had to put up with a wavering screen, because I've been holding my iPad because we couldn't make the technology work without that. So apologies, but I've enjoyed the conversation, Jesse, and thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you. Definitely also part of the sacrifices we're making, you know, for just having this platform, however small it may be. So thank you so much. And just, if you would like to nominate a pioneer, please send an email to info@zayedsustainabilityprize.com with information about the pioneer, and you never know, you might just be that pioneer. So from us here at the Zayed Sustainability Prize, we wish you a good day, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you're watching this, and stay safe. Bye-bye.